Okay, my friends, it is Friday, April 18th. And if I couldn't prove to you that this happened, I would like, I would say this is too fictional. Donald Trump is calling both the Russians and the Ukrainians fools and horrible people. Okay, that's not going to go over well, but let's hear just a little clip and then I'll set the table and explain what's going on in our three big stories today. Listen.
We're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people. And
okay, so we'll come back to that in just a moment. So to set the table, yesterday, I guess it was, we saw that he was meeting with Maloney, and he was saying this.
Vladimir Putin have to respond to your ceasefire proposal before you put secondary tariffs or sanctions on Russia?
We'll see what that will be.
The question is, when will you set secondary sanctions on Russia? Because, like, the Russians haven't done anything. In fact, just as I was about to put this together, Greg texted me and told me that the Sumy electrical infrastructure was just hit. Part of the city is without any power. So that's happening right now. It's not like the Russians were respecting any of this anyway. And he's threatened secondary tariffs and has done nothing.
We're going to be hearing from them this week, very shortly, actually, and we'll see. But we want it to stop. We want the death and the killing to stop.
Okay, and that's what he's saying. Now, let's flip over here. This is the UN ambassador from Russia, and here's what he's saying. He's saying this. I don't know how close we are to a ceasefire. This is a big question for me personally because, as I said, we had an attempt at a limited ceasefire with regard to energy infrastructure, which was not respected by the Ukrainian side. Under these circumstances, it's simply unrealistic to talk about a ceasefire at this stage and today. Okay, so that's where he is. Lavrov said the same thing 2 days ago. Nothing's going anywhere. Okay, then there was this meeting in Paris that was happening yesterday. The Ukrainian and American delegations were in Paris. And then we see a full ceasefire in Ukraine may come within weeks, says Witkoff, according to Bloomberg. The U.S. expressed this goal yesterday in Paris. Macron and Trump's envoy Witkoff discussed it behind closed doors. The fact that the U.S. wants it does not mean it will happen. That's according to Noel reports. Okay, that's fair enough. But Witkoff keeps pressing forward and is saying, yeah, it's almost here. We're very close. Okay. Then Rubio came out and he made some really interesting remarks. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to have you listen to what he had to say. Listen to this.
I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it.
Whoa, it's not our war. This is the first that we hear of the U.S. backing away from it. And then there was more about backing away today as well.
The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. But it's not our war. I want everyone to understand that. And the reason why I make that point is the president has spent 87 days at the highest level of his government repeatedly taking efforts to bring this war to an end.
Okay. So supposed to stop within the first 24 hours, but that was all campaign rhetoric. Then they said 90 days. We're approaching 90 days, and nothing's really happened.
We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides.
Whether this is possible or not, which is why we're engaging both
try
sides.
To figure out very soon, and I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is the war that can be ended.
Yeah, I don't think that the Russians want to end it. I don't think the Ukrainians want to end it, or at least not on bad terms.
We're prepared to do whatever we can to facilitate that and make sure that it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If it's not possible, if we're so far apart that this is not going to happen, then I think the president's probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done.
Yeah, he's signaling that right now. Isn't that interesting? What a shift.
You know, we'll do what we can on the margins. We'll be ready to help whenever you're ready to have peace. But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about a matter of days.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where we are. All right. So now we saw Rubio make that statement, which is the first statement that's really like that. Jake Bro posted this. The Paris Peace Accords to end the Vietnam War took 5 years to negotiate. Trump couldn't even last 100 days on Russia and Ukraine. Well, Trump's in an odd spot. He doesn't want to support Ukraine, and he doesn't want to offend Russia. It's not like It's not like Biden not wanting to have Russia pull the trigger. Trump kind of wants to make a deal. He doesn't just want to not escalate and maybe have a nuclear war. So it looks like they might just walk away from it. It's really odd. Okay, not our war, says the U.S. State Secretary Rubio warns U.S. ready to move on is a headline in a Kyiv Post. Incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz wants Germany to become Ukraine's arsenal. The Kremlin is so mad they call Merz a Nazi and insulted his war veteran father. Well, it is not our war, that's true. It is over in Europe, and it looks like Europe's starting to step up. I talked about the arms production yesterday. So go back to 3 big stories yesterday to see that, because that's about all that Putin really fears. Meanwhile, Rubio is saying this as well.
Part of the sanctions against Russia, many of them, are European sanctions that we can't lift if that's ever to be part of a deal. So they're going to have to be involved no matter what. It's their continent. This is happening on the continent of Europe. And so obviously European powers will care deeply about what happens. So they have a stake in this, and we recognize it. And but in the end, I think we all want the same thing.
But I think that they're signaling they're going to be walking away or backing up. We'll just have to have another video talking about, like, what does this mean actually? But before we do something like that, let's finish with this. This comment here was right. It's so chilling how nonchalantly he brings up the lifting of sanctions, as if he does not comprehend that it would lead to massive slaughter of not only Ukrainians, but quite likely Baltic people. He seems completely detached from European reality. And then this comment from Yaroslav Trimofov, he's a correspondent from the Wall Street Journal who is saying this. So having seen the full comments by Rubio, sounds like he presented the draft deal, which would require Europeans to lift sanctions on Russia, to the Ukrainian delegation in Paris, which is taking it back to Kyiv for a Zelensky decision. And the threat of walking away is, in fact, primarily directed at Ukraine. So when Trump's talking about fools, he's most likely talking about Ukraine in this context. Now let's hear the whole clip.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult.
One of the two parties makes it very difficult.
We're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that. And Marco's right in saying we want to see it end. Think of it, every day.
So we're going to take a pass and walk away. That's what he's saying. Here's Greg Terry talking about that. And he just, what Trump didn't realize is that he just hardened both sides, well, especially the Ukrainians, if he was just talking about the Ukrainians, in calling them this. Like, if you call me a fool, it bounces off me and doesn't, like, okay, I mean, read my comments. I mean, I have people say that kind of thing all the time. Is he really a professor? Well, a professor of what? Of stupidity? Like, I mean, that kind of stupid stuff. Yeah, whatever. Okay. But in this Slavic culture, it's very different. Here's Greg.
Today, just moments ago, Donald Trump making a huge mistake by calling both Ukrainians and Russians fools. Now, I've worked in that part of the world for over 30 years, and you may have well used every curse word in the book when you call them a fool while we're trying to negotiate a peace. We're going to get to all of
Yeah, it just doesn't, it's a very high insult that's going to harden their positions, not bring them to the table. Okay. Now, why is this going on? That's the second big story. Well, the pivot may be because you have too many priorities going on simultaneously. So, for example, the DOGE, right? The Global Engagement Center, a State Department unit that called out Russian and Chinese propaganda campaigns, has been shut down. That's part of DOGE clearing, what's unnecessary from the State Department. So I wouldn't look at this and just say, this is just Trump in Putin's pocket. I think it's part of that bigger DOGE picture, but you can do DOGE, or you can do this, or you can do that, but you can't do everything. Okay, China simultaneously is sending troops to Ukraine to prepare for an attack on Taiwan, according to The Hill. According to experts, Chinese soldiers fighting alongside Russia are gaining combat experience that could be applied in a future assault on Taiwan, and some believe an invasion could happen within the next 6 months. Maybe that's what's going on, and the U.S. needs to be thinking not just about Ukraine, but about that. So maybe that's what's motivating them. At the same time, the U.S. will deploy missile systems on the islands between the Philippines and Taiwan. Newsweek reports the units of the U.S. Marine Corps will station Nemesis anti-ship missiles systems on the Philippine Bataan Islands located in the middle of the Luzon Strait that separates the country from Taiwan as part of the upcoming Balkan exercises. And the U.S. is deploying B-1 bombers to Japan for the first time since the Vietnam War. The mission aims to enhance operational readiness in the Indo-Pacific region. They're gearing up for what could be something popping off with China. Okay. Now, when I say that, you have to have priorities. There's this great book, Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. And he said this. He said, when you have a priority, it's singular, right? You don't have everything's a priority. And if you have a priority, you have to have posteriorities. Posterior, like your butt, right? Posterior. And so there's a priority and then everything else is secondary. So where we are right now, it's not going to work because, okay, so what are Trump's priorities? You can seal the border and deal with illegal immigration. Okay, that could be your priority, or Ukraine could be your priority, or ending inflation could be your priority, or American first trade policies with tariffs, but some are confounding others, like the inflation is going to be caused by the tariff policies of America first kind of trade policies. Or you can be energy dominant, or you can protect the U.S. dollar, or you can reform federal bureaucracy, or if you have no tax on tips, how are you going to pay for it? Or you can protect Social Security or reduce federal regulations. You can do any of those things, but you can only really focus on a couple of these, maybe 3 of these at any given time. You're not going to be able to do all of them. And that's what it's like. Like a military principle is you focus your forces and you punch through, right? You don't do your forces going everywhere at the same time. And that's what Trump is doing in his management. Connect the dots. Joe Wilson says war criminal Putin, the CCP, and the terrorist regime in Tehran are all working together to support Houthi terrorists against the Yemeni people and government. Rule of gun versus rule of law. So if they have to focus on what's going on in Yemen or what's going on with Taiwan or you just name it, they have to focus on a lot of things. Okay, let's go to the next big story, what Trump's doing to the economy. Trump accidentally hit Putin's oil budget with a $20 billion bomb. Now, this was accidental. It's not intentional, but nonetheless, Russia's oil revenues plunged after Trump's trade moves triggered a global price drop, cutting deep into the Kremlin's primary source of income. This is in the Euromaidan press. Just a couple paragraphs here. The Russian economy is heavily reliant on energy exports, with oil and gas revenues constituting approximately 30 to 35% of Russia's federal budget in 2024. Beyond the federal budget, the broader Russian economy is significantly dependent on oil exports, which generated $192 billion in 2024. So that's really the issue here. It's just amazing how much of this is going to be affected by a drop in oil price, and that's what Trump's doing accidentally. Now, I talked about some things like with tariffs, like with what he's doing. Can Congress restrain Trump? Maybe, maybe not. This was the last video. I just posted it just before I started recording this video. Yeah, you'll have to see how this all plays out constitutionally. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they can, but what they're trying to do right now may not work, and I lay everything out. Okay. By the way, my thumbnails have gotten a lot better here lately. I mean, I've been really lazy with just posting an image of myself with a daily brief or something like that. But hey, it's getting a little bit better. And that's because a guy named Steve reached out to me and he's been helping me try to improve these thumbnails. So they'll hopefully get better and better and better over time. So thank you, Steve. I greatly appreciate it. Okay, now, the value of the U.S. dollar continues to fall. So it's not just the stock indices, the dollar itself. Here's the date in January where Trump comes into office, and then the dollar itself is being weakened as all these trade things are going on. And while I'm at this, here, Kurt Eichenwald wrote this, and this seems like good analysis as far as I can tell. I'm not an economist, but I have enough credits to teach basic econ or lower level econ classes, which I do occasionally. Okay. The people look only at the stock market are missing the full magnitude of Trump's economic incompetence. Again, this is his commentary. His yes, no, maybe idiocy with tariffs is leaving equity investors with no sense of which way to go. Okay, I prefer cleaner language than yes, no, maybe idiocy. But yeah, when you're sending mixed messages to the market doesn't like that. But worse is the bond market. The near cliche of markets is that when investors sell stocks, they rush to U.S. bonds. It's a rare time in our history that this standard response does not happen. They're not rushing to bonds. This means that they are losing faith or certainty in the U.S. long-term economic future. He being Trump, he doesn't understand Fed Chairman Powell's statements about interest rates that are driven not by magical thinking like Trump, but by the realities of the bond market. So Trump wants the chairman of the Fed, Powell, to lower the interest rate. And if you do that, certain things happen. People borrow more because it's cheaper money, so they borrow, right? And that will create greater inflation if you're already on the cusp. And that's what's going to happen. If Trump has his way, he'll put someone in who will cut interest rates, leading to huge inflation. And yeah, that's where we are. By the way, while we're talking about this, I keep showing you this is the S&P 500. This is when Trump announced the Liberation Day, and then it fell, and then he announced, guess what? We're putting a pause on it, and it sprung back up. Okay, so I use the S&P 500 most of the time. This is the Russell 2000 index. The S&P 500 are like the S&P 500 like large cap stocks. This is small cap stocks and the Russell 2000, and it mirrors the same kind of pattern. Someone corrected me by email and said, yeah, you really shouldn't have used the Russell 2000 because that's small caps. He's right. Absolutely. Thank you. So maybe the Wilshire 5000, which is like mirroring the whole market. Do you notice a consistent pattern? Like this is what's happened across all of them. And the Wilshire 5000 is mirroring all of them. It's only like 3,000 and some odd stocks, but it's called the Wilshire 5000. So you go to any indices and you see the same kind of thing happening here. All right, last little bit, I want to show you this. Russian media now says that the U.S. wants to end the war in Ukraine because it lost. The U.S. lost. Russia will always humiliate anyone who sides with it because that's what bullies do. Even when they're not actually strong, they fake it with loud chest thumping and betrayal. Never forget, we're talking about the country currently begging North Korea for ammunition, but this is what the guy says. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, it's not really a war between Ukraine and Russia. That's what he says. It's a war of a war of America, which is part of NATO and the West against Russia. And he goes on and says, so one could say that Russia is defending not only its borders, but also its culture, its civilization, and it's trying to preserve its integrity. That's how this new war began. Well, not exactly. What we're seeing is America's desire to end the war because it has lost. Yeah, that's what he's saying, because it's lost. Now America wants to shift focus as quickly and as efficiently as possible to the Middle East to carry out its plans with the Iranians and the Israelis. They want to package this war up and freeze it because for them, it's already lost. And the parade in Moscow itself will serve as confirmation that Russia is a winner. Well, be interesting to see what the parade's like in Moscow, and even if it won't be canceled this year. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.